On April 8, 1984, an American named Barry Seal met with Pablo Escobar to discuss their drug smuggling operation, which used a dozen aircraft to smuggle an estimated $3 to $5 billion worth of cocaine into the United States. Now, the most unbelievable part of the entire story? Barry Seal was working for the U.S.'s Drug Enforcement Administration, and the entire thing was running parallel to a larger operation centered in Nicaragua, where CIA planes were used to smuggle cocaine into the U.S. Sound too crazy to be a true story? Sure, except for the fact that the DEA has acknowledged Seal was one of theirs, and the CIA has admitted that they knew their planes were being used to smuggle cocaine. Of course, only after an investigative journalist, Gary Webb, blew it all open and Congress started asking questions. So why was the CIA and DEA smuggling cocaine into the United States in the middle of the war on drugs? Welcome to Buried Origins. Today we'll try answering that question by investigating one of the craziest stories of the Cold War. So let's jump into it. Setting the frame a little bit, during the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union are in a global struggle for domination, but they can't fight each other openly, or else they risk nuclear annihilation. And so they fight each other in the shadows, utilizing their intelligence agencies to overthrow hostile governments and expand their influence. Communism's popularity spread throughout the world, especially in Latin America, and its presence there is seen as an existential threat by the US government, as it brought both the ideology and the Soviet Union's forces closer to the homeland. So US administrations tasked the CIA to overthrow hostile governments there and impose puppet regimes, and the CIA has been tied to at least 12 to 14 coups across Guatemala, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, Uruguay, Paraguay, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, Panama, Dominican Republic, Cuba, and Ecuador. Now, almost always, the CIA's involvement in these coups and revolutions was highly secretive, and they amounted to a series of secret wars, which often propped up regimes with terrible human rights records, well known for torturing and executing anyone opposed to their rule and anyone who was a suspected leftist. We only found out about the CIA's involvement in several of these secret wars due to the work of some very courageous investigative journalists. So the Reagan administration was running one of these secret wars in Nicaragua in the 80s, where they were supporting a rebel group called the Contras, who were well known for committing atrocities during their fight against a left-wing government at the time. Congress finally decided to stand up to the presidency and use their power as budget holder to forbid Reagan from using government funds to support the Contras. Of course, Reagan and the CIA immediately started looking for ways to fund the Contras illegally, and came up with the ludicrous idea of selling missiles to Iran, which was under a US arms embargo at the time as it was a hostile country. But Iran was fighting a war with its neighbor Iraq and needed advanced weapons, and Reagan and the CIA needed a way to get funds off the books, and so somehow it worked. Reagan then used the CIA and its planes to smuggle weapons and funds to the Contras, and for this the CIA worked with drug smugglers in Costa Rica, El Salvador, and Nicaragua. It would fly planes full of weapons to hidden jungle airstrips, and after unloading, those planes would then be filled up with cocaine, most of it from Pablo Escobar's Medellin cartel, and flown back to rural airfields in Arkansas and Louisiana for distribution. Now, this wasn't a sting operation, where someone is planted inside a criminal organization to gather evidence as part of an ongoing law enforcement operation. The DEA did have some sting operations, like the one it was running with Barry Seal, but the sole purpose of the CIA's operation was to smuggle weapons to the Contras, and the cocaine that made it back to the US wasn't part of any law enforcement operation, it all made its way to the streets. Several DEA agents saw these planes being loaded with cocaine, and began to inquire before being told to look away in the name of national security. The CIA denied the entire thing until they were forced to admit that they knew their planes were being used to smuggle cocaine. Now, why they did so, we actually have no idea. We can only speculate, but this was all part of an operation to raise money to fund the Contras, and the value of the cocaine that was smuggled into the US was in the billions of dollars. But again, speculation. So you might be asking, just how do we know all this? And the answer to that is thanks to one investigative journalist, Gary Webb, who in 1996 blew the entire operation open with his Dark Alliance series, based on testimony from several FBI, DEA, and CIA agents. The story sparked national outcry, as the smuggling ring had helped start the crack cocaine epidemic in the US that devastated urban, Black, and Hispanic communities. Initially, the CIA denied the story, and Webb was crucified by the journalistic community, condemned by major news outlets for publishing an unsubstantiated story, and demoted at his paper, which eventually withdrew its support from his story. But the story had been a national controversy and led to several internal investigations in the US government, and 2 years later, in 1998, the CIA's Inspector General admitted that the CIA knew its planes were being used to smuggle cocaine into the US, but this news was downplayed by all major media outlets such as the New York Times, LA Times, and Washington Post, who had all condemned Gary Webb 2 years prior and didn't want to be seen as being wrong in doing so. At the same time, the media cycle was consumed with the Monica Lewinsky scandal, so Webb never got his moment of vindication. He went on being a discredited journalist even though the central part of his story was proven correct, and he was unable to secure a job with any major news outlet. The scandal ruined his life, and he was left bankrupt, divorced, and outcast. He was eventually found in 2004 with 2 bullet wounds to the head. His death ruled as suicide. Over the years, a series of other investigations by U.S. government agencies and independent news outlets confirmed that the CIA knew its planes were being used to smuggle cocaine into the U.S. and did nothing about it. And with this news, Gary Webb's image was gradually rehabilitated, with several U.S. media outlets saying that they were wrong to condemn him. Eventually, a movie on his life in the Dark Alliance series was released in 2014, starring Jeremy Renner, called Kill the Messenger. Definitely give it a watch, it's a great movie. There's also a movie called American Made, starring Tom Cruise as Barry Seal, which is a good movie, but it does portray the CIA as running the entire smuggling ring, which is total speculation. So, in terms of what else happened with this story, well, the Contras were never successful in the revolution, and the CIA pretty much lost all of its interest in rooting out communism in Latin America with the end of the Cold War. There was backlash towards the CIA from Congress, as they had blatantly broken laws when they violated the US arms embargo on Iran by selling it missiles and by funding the Contras, which they were specifically forbidden from doing. But of course, there were no real consequences for anyone in power, as is so often the case. So, the answer to the question we asked at the beginning is yes, the CIA's planes were used to smuggle Pablo Escobar's cocaine into the US, and not as part of any sting operation either. Now, whether the CIA ordered it or received any funding from it is still unknown. Well, that's all for now. If you enjoyed the video, please share and subscribe. See ya!